church is a great place to have hard conversations.
There was a situation where there was a woman who was expressing a lot of criticism in the middle of class towards the family proclamation. And she was like, very like a bunch of old white men wrote this and it's really not relevant. And it very much excludes people. And no one said a word. And I was in this ward, I was new in this ward. And so I just remember looking to my right and looking to my left and thinking, this is core doctrine. Like, no one's going to say anything. And later I had a conversation in the hallway with one of my friends who was more familiar with the environment. And she was like, oh yeah, there's a few women in our ward who are really upset, but the family proclamation makes them really upset. That was her words. They think it's the word she was problematic. And I don't speak up because I just don't want to make anyone feel shame. I don't want anyone to feel excluded because maybe they don't have like the perfect family, or maybe there's things in there that they don't agree with. And so that was the first recollection that I had where I was like, I expect to defend the family proclamation out in the world. Absolutely. I wasn't expecting there to be such a crisis of conversation that you can't even necessarily talk about it in some places at church. We are self-censoring about the family proclamation. We're not using the words gender. We're not saying traditional marriage. We don't want people to be uncomfortable.
But I have sensed some hesitancy to even talk about it.
I mean, because I've heard people refer to them as old white men too. To me, that's where you try and, I guess, like dehumanize them, right? You never say, well, the prophet and the apostles came out and wrote this. It's always these old white men, right? You kind of distance the men from their position and their calling to kind of make it seem like it's okay to bash the document, because if it's not prophetic, if it's not from God, then you would just say a bunch of dudes got together and wrote this.
And then I think we, in a very lazy way, we can use the proclamation to shut down conversation. Some good that has come out of this movement that we take for granted.
His highest hopes for us is that we can become like him.
There are things that people just kind of want to avoid talking about, but we wanted to tackle this issue front and center, because I wonder if this is some kind of cultural thing that might be happening with us in our wards, with our experiences with women in the church or whatnot. So if you could pull up the infographic.
Got it.
Okay, so what we have here is a picture of the family proclamation with a lot of phrases that are redacted. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in the 90s, our living prophet put out a declaration, a prophetic declaration, in which he declared some very specific truths that we hold very dear. And some of those truths are that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God, that gender is eternal, and then encouraged us to go forward and to make families. And what am I missing from that?
Oh, that's a great summary of the things that are in it. Something that is neat to know is that this document was the first of its kind. I mean, the church has done press releases. The church has done lots of, legal statements. The church, there's conference talks, endless conference talks, Liahona, Ensign articles. But this was this very unique proclamation to the world. And on one piece of paper, all the apostles signed it. It took, as we hear from Elder Oaks's President Oaks's recent talk, it took a year of praying about, thinking about, writing, drafting, redrafting until all of them signed onto it. And then it was read in general conference. And it wasn't just read and then forgotten about. It was printed all over the place. And it is still talked about in conference talks. Tikla, you were saying at BYU, you took several classes.
I took, at least one class where the entire purpose of the class was to study this one document.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So this document, I think, is definitely worth talking about today, because there are people in our church who have it on their walls, who've memorized it, who agree with everything, who see it as doctrine, who see it as very important and we should be sharing it, we should be talking about it. And then there are some who think that it's outdated, irrelevant, wrong. A friend said, "Oh, that was nice. This group of old men, that was their opinion. They shared in the 90s, and we don't put it up because that's just not how things are anymore." So there's lots of opinions, even within the church, about that, about the proclamation. And I think that because there are differing opinions, maybe of not only the things that are written in it, but what the document is. Is it truth? Is it opinion? I think that leads to some moments in church where we feel we can't talk about it. So that's what we wanted to talk about today.
I like it. Let's do it.
So I had two experiences when that kicked off this kind of weird realization that something culturally might be changing. I think it was a majority women's session of church. And in church, you're like a little more careful with what you say because you want to make sure that you're not like hurting the spirit in any way. At least that's how I am. I don't feel like I'm as free with my words as I might be like on YouTube. At church, I want to make sure I'm not doing anything
in front
to hurt the
of hundreds
spirit.
of strangers. We're free.
Right?
Say whatever you want. Church, no. I just do.
There was a situation where there was a woman who was expressing a lot of criticism in the middle of class towards the family proclamation. And she was like, very like a bunch of old white men wrote this and it's really not relevant. And it very much excludes people. And no one said a word. And I was in this ward. I was new in this ward. And so I just remember looking to my right and looking to my left and thinking, this is core doctrine. Like no one's going to say anything. And later, I had a conversation in the hallway with one of my friends who was more familiar with the environment. And she was like, "Oh, yeah, there's a few women in our ward who are really upset. But the family proclamation makes them really upset." That was her words. They think it's the word she was problematic. And I don't speak up because I just don't want to make anyone feel shame. I don't want anyone to feel excluded because maybe they don't have like the perfect family or maybe there's things in there that they don't agree with. And so that was the first recollection that I had where I was like, I expect to defend the family proclamation out in the world. Absolutely. I wasn't expecting there to be such a crisis of conversation that you can't even necessarily talk about it in some places at church. And so that was, I don't know if anyone has an answer or insights on that.
Well, I was going to say, so when you said that woman got up and said a bunch of old white men, immediately that's where, because I've heard people refer to them as old white men too. To me, that's where you try and, I guess, like dehumanize them, right? You never say, well, the prophet and the apostles came out and wrote this. It's always these old white men, right? You kind of distance the men from their position and their calling to kind of make it seem like it's okay to bash the document, because if it's not prophetic, if it's not from God, then you would just say a bunch of dudes got together and wrote this.
Right. Well, and I've seen this happen too, maybe not nearly that intense. Like I haven't ever experienced someone getting up and denouncing it essentially, but I have sensed some hesitancy to even talk about it. It's kind of like, let's just maybe not address it. We'll just leave it alone, kind of more like the Bruno. No. Just don't bring it up, right? We don't want to ruffle any feathers. This might hurt someone's feelings if we read this or study it. And so we'll just leave it alone. So that's been more my experience. And I also think there might be a little bit of overcorrection in other cases. I think there's some people who are on one side who don't want to engage with it because of the potential for hurting feelings. And without meaning to, they're actually causing harm by not teaching the principles that are in it. Most of the principles in here have nothing to do with gay marriage or with have a lot of babies and get married. I mean, this is like, we are divine. We are children of God. Our spirits existed before we were born.
Tigla, when you say they caused harm by not teaching it, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like you're saying because they're not teaching what's in the family proclamation, we're depriving people of learning these amazing, eternal, beautiful truths?
Exactly. Exactly. I think if you're so scared to teach the proclamation because you've been told it's harmful, then you might, if there's a young woman, and I've had this situation as a young women's president, if there's a young woman who's struggling with her identity as a woman because she's been told if she's not interested in lipstick and girly things, she's actually a boy, and you don't teach her that her gender is eternal, that she is a daughter of God first, you're depriving her of the freedom to explore her interests while being grounded in who she really is. If she knows that she's a daughter of God first and foremost, then she can have so much freedom of expression to learn what she's interested in and what she's not interested in, and what she can bring to the table with that knowledge of who she is. If she doesn't ever hear that, then she's in a dangerous space where she might miss out on that truth. Because if she's not hearing it in the world, and she might not be hearing it at home, you're her one shot for someone to tell her, you are a daughter of God, and that will last forever. And now go explore who you are. There's so much fun in exploring that. And does anyone want to jump in on that before I move to the other side?
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah. Can I just say something about like you were talking about? This is a space where people can learn about eternal truths. I talked with a young woman who said in seminary class, there's someone who has different views on gender for herself, and she said it's hard to talk about these eternal truths of gender now. And she's like, that was supposed to be our safe space. Seminary was supposed to be our safe space where we can talk about men and women and traditional marriage and God's plan for us. And now we can't. So I just think, I mean, I thought it was very interesting that she used the word safe space. That's a term that is often used when people are talking about non-traditional marriage, that sort of lifestyle. Like, I need my safe space over here. But she was saying, can we have our safe space where we can talk about motherhood and gender, those sort of, God's view on
interesting.
gender.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wonder too, well, so I think sometimes this problem is caused because there are people who use the proclamation as a weapon a little bit, or maybe not as a weapon, but as an excuse not to think very deeply. So if there's a situation where I feel uncomfortable, someone comes in dressed differently than I would expect, or someone is giving a comment in a young women's lesson that is maybe derailing the lesson a little bit. And then I think we, in a very lazy way, we can use the proclamation to shut down conversation. Can say, well, God says this, it's in the proclamation, end of conversation, done. Instead of listening to what they're actually trying to say and then teaching the true principle that relates to their struggle. That takes more work. That means you have to actually get to know the person that you're teaching or ministering to or befriending, right? That takes way more work. So there's a lazy option on both sides. And both of those ways don't actually know what the proclamation says.
Well, that sounds like a very Christ-like way to do it. To be centered, to know the truth, to be familiar with it, to be able to teach it, to be able to share it, but also listen and discuss and learn. And then when you understand this person and when you understand the issues and what they're thinking, then you can teach more truth and share truth and say how it applies to them and whatnot. So it's like, but I feel like the foundation is always knowing the truth. And I think what the proclamation always comes back to me, what's so much in the gospel, everything always comes back to God's highest hopes for us. His highest hopes for us is that we can become like him, that we can become as knowledgeable, as capable as him, as wise, as caring, as all-knowing, as a creator like he is. It's all about creation. He created us and wants the cycle of creation for eternity to continue. And to me, that's what the church's main focus is. If you want to pull up there, Cardin, the fourfold mission of the church, it is live the gospel of Jesus. So it says, like, for the mission of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the work of salvation, exaltation. There's 4 things. 1 is live the gospel of Jesus Christ. 2 is care for those in need. 3 is invite all to receive the gospel. And 4 is to unite families for eternity. So living the gospel of Jesus Christ, that's how, that's taking the sacrament. That's helping us learn the commandments. That's helping us follow Jesus Christ. That used to be perfect the saints, right? And care for those in need. That's caring for, feeding and clothing, and also all the ministering that we do, all the worldwide work we do. That's a lot. Inviting all to receive the gospel. That's what the missionaries do. And that's what every member missionary is doing. And then unite families for eternity. I feel like of all the things the church does, we do a lot. We take in a lot of youth groups. We help a lot of people. What our biggest goal is to bring salvation to anybody who wants it. And if you want it, great. Make the sacrifices that you need to get it. And exaltation is what that highest hope I was telling you that God has for us, to become like him forever, and to create and to build and learn and grow forever. And God, if we don't want that, he won't force it on us. I feel like the proclamation is pointing to that ultimate hope that God has for us. This life is a preparatory time to be in families and to learn and grow and to create and mentor and teach children, just like he's doing to us, so that in the next life we can do that forever. So I think the proclamation is pointing to that truth. And so if you are in the church, and there's so many people who come to our church, so many people who are baptized, and maybe they don't all want that. And that's okay. That's what's beautiful about the gospel of Jesus Christ, is you get out what you put in. He's not going to force you to do anything. So if you want exaltation, you can have it. And this is what exaltation is this family life. And I think it's really wonderful that we have the family proclamation. And then soon after that, the living Christ was put out, that proclamation. And then after that, the restoration was put out. And I think those 3 declarations go so well together. The family is this ideal. This is what the ideal in this life, the ideal in eternity, but we all fall short. So we have Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ will help us be perfected and reach that ideal. And how do we access the full power of Jesus Christ and his covenances and his ordinances of power? Through the restoration. So ideal is the family. Jesus Christ fills in all the gaps because we're all imperfect for that ideal. And then how do we access Jesus Christ's power? Through the restoration. So I love those 3 documents.
That's awesome.
I had a situation where it was a kind of a unique situation, because Elder Gong came to North Carolina, which is rare in North Carolina for us to get a general authority. So we were very excited.
Yay!
Yeah, we were like, it's a big deal on the East Coast when you get a general authority. So Elder Gong came, and at the time I was the Young Women's president, so I got to go. And I was with Relief Society president, and I was like, if I ever go to a concert, I'm going with you, because she got us to the front seats. Like, we were like feet away from Elder Gong. Yeah, it was like, I felt like.
So when he jumped in the audience, like, you caught him, you were there for the crowd surfing.
It felt like, right. So it was, it was a leadership thing. It was a leadership training. So I asked him this question that was, and his answer was kind of one of those parabolic answers that you would see Jesus give in the New Testament, that has an initial meaning, and then later as you think about it, you're like, oh. So I asked him that, because at the time I was teaching youth, and I was saying, I think there's a tendency for a lot of us to self-censor our thoughts about the family. That's the only word I know how to use, is that we are self-censoring about the family proclamation. We're not using the words gender. We're not saying traditional marriage. We're not using those terms. We're just saying, the family, but we're self-censoring. We're not wanting to talk about it because we don't want people to be uncomfortable. But we also believe these things are true. And we also believe these things will bring people happiness. So how do we find this balance of loving people and allowing people to feel loved and invited and included and part of God's family, which they are? As Tikla mentioned, like, you are a daughter of God, you are a son of God, like, full stop. But how do you also not self-censor the truth? How do you not muddy down the truth? Because the truth is powerful, and also not be embarrassed of the truth. And he gave 2-sentence answer. It was a 2-sentence answer. And he said, God loves all of his children. Because he loves them, he has given them a pathway to return to him. That was the whole answer. And I was like, well, that was lame. I was like, that guy,
have to
and I know, I think
now.
Elder Gong was a former diplomat. I think he worked for the State Department. So I was like, I see what you
Very
did there.
diplomatic.
But as I thought about it later, I was like, it's really true that they're two complete thoughts. That we think that, God loves you, full stop, you're his child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because he loves you, he's given you truths and paths and choices you can make to achieve the highest, like, happiness in this life and the next. And so I don't know, I just really liked his answer. I feel like it is a balance to talk about the family proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
Well, and I would say maybe not so much for me, not so much a balance, but more of a depth. Like, I think we need to go deeper. I think we have a kind of a surface level understanding of it, and we use the same religious words over and over again, exaltation and ideal and like celestial and all these things, but we don't necessarily, we hear them so often, they maybe lose their meaning a little bit. So I think we have to dig a little deeper into it so that we can explain it in new ways that apply to everyone. Is that maybe?
Yeah.
I had an experience with my neighbors where they are all Christian, and I'm in the South, so that's not uncommon. They're very Christian. They all attend church, and they don't know it, but they talk to me about the family proclamation all the time. And they don't apologize or ask permission to teach their kids about their born gender at all.
Right.
They're not embarrassed. They're confident.
You're talking about gender. Can you pull up that little Valentine at the end of the Discord?
Oh, yeah.
Pardon. Okay, so Rachel, you mentioned gender. I have to show you my favorite Valentine that I received this year from Jonah, our favorite ward librarian here. So pull it up there, Cardin. It's red. It says, my love, it's President Oaks. It says, my love for you is like our gender, eternal.
Oh.
Wasn't that a romantic Valentine?
You have a very intellectual husband. Doctrinally intellectual.
Yes.
Okay,
Mushy too.
and then I was
Mushy,
just
gushy.
You want to cozy up and read the Joseph Smith papers, Charlotte?
Oh, gosh.
No, cozy up and read the Apocrypha. Yeah, that's what
Oh my
we do
gosh.
every day.
Book of the Giants. Here we go.
Okay, and then I was gonna say how we like talk about this more. I think we have to view it like anything else that someone might struggle with. I used to be a member of this ward. It since has been dissolved. It was super sad, but it was the best ward I've ever been in because everyone was super open with their struggles. And I think that only happens when you feel comfortable with each other. We had a small ward, I'll give it that. So we were all very comfortable with each other, but testimony meeting was like, I'm struggling with my drug addiction again, but I've seen God and, in my prayers and through others. And it was just very just like, wow, like people have some real issues. And it honestly was like, I feel so like honored that you would open up and tell us all your struggles, because then we can pray for you. Then we can talk about it. And it's not some secret elephant in the room that no one really wants to talk about it, or we kind of, whisper like, oh, so I think he's struggling, right? That causes gossip, and that's not good. And so I think if someone is struggling with this, instead of just, taking a Sharpie and, Xing out parts that you don't like, find someone in your ward that you can literally have a conversation with and say, I am struggling. Can you help me understand this? What are your views on this? How do you interpret this? Have you prayed about this? Where do we go from here? Because honestly, there's some things in the church that I struggle with, and I've prayed about it, and sometimes I still have a stupor of thought about it. But then I talk to friends and they're like, hey, like I don't struggle with that, but I do struggle with this, and here, let's talk about it, right? So I think first and foremost is to be open about your struggles. And I think that's what Jesus would want us to do. We are instruments in his hands, and we are here to do his work. And we need to talk, and we need to feel open, and we need to feel comfortable talking with each other and talking about our issues. And I know that this one is a big one for a lot of people, and they feel, I don't know, alienated, or they feel like they can't talk about it, or that the church is not for them. And nothing could be further from the truth.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Speaking of sharpening something out, there's another thing there on the Discord, Cardin. It's like the third one right after those two proclamations that have been edited. I did my own editing. I thought that the 10 Commandments, I mean, if the proclamation is old, the 10 Commandments are really old and outdated.
Was it an old white man? I don't
with an even longer beard. An even longer
holding
beard.
up Western civilization is so annoying.
So I don't like those anymore. So I decided to edit them myself. Thou shalt have gods before me. Thou shalt make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember to buy Girl Scout cookies. And then that one about mother and father, just cross that one out. Thou shalt kill. Thou shalt commit adultery. Thou shalt steal. Thou shalt bear false witness, and thou shalt covet. I think that is a lot more applicable nowadays. It's much more relevant. It offends less people. So there, I just did what I wanted to make it fit for me.
Oh man. Well, and okay, so I feel like so often we only hear interpretations of the family proclamation to the world as opposed to actually reading it. When I read the family a proclamation to the world, I hear an invitation to the kingdom of God. I hear a description of what we're learning. And so getting married and having a faithful marriage is actually kind of hard to do. Like, it requires a lot of things to go right for you and a lot of things that are maybe out of your control. So I think if I wasn't in a marriage and I was hearing everybody use the proclamation in context of just a marriage, I would feel really alienated. I wouldn't feel like I'm included in this conversation. And so, but I think what's so cool about the proclamation is while marriage is symbolic of the unity of men and women, it can be applied to every scenario where we have masculinity and femininity, right? If you are aiming your life in such a way that you're learning to be in cooperation with the other half of humanity, or if rather than in competition, then you are learning the kingdom of heaven. That is a quality of the kingdom of heaven. If you are orienting your life towards the future generation, towards what is good for children in your society and your community, then you are living the kingdom in its ideal form. We talk about like the ideal family, whatever. No one has one. That's not really what we're talking about. This is the kingdom of God that we're all part of. Regardless of our family status or our marital status, we are in the family of God. And in the family of God, we are learning heaven. There's a quote. Oh, what's his name? Who says it? I'll have to look up his name later.
Brad Wilcox?
No, he's not a member of the church. But there's a quote that goes,
Dr. Dre.
Home interprets heaven. Home is heaven for beginners. Isn't that cute?
That is cute.
And so as we're learning how to be the kind of people who can get along with each other, we're learning heaven. And that's what I hear when I read the proclamation. Here are some great ways to become the kind of person who gets along well in a family, regardless of your situation.
Yeah. I loved what Charlotte was saying, where like, you know, she's like, okay, cool. So the 10 Commandments are just old school. Well, let's just dispense with the ideal. And it just doesn't work for me. And then with Tikla, I really appreciate that point you made about like, because I can empathize with that point you made about like if your marriage is hard, and there are times where I think if you feel like your marriage is falling short, you can feel isolated, or like, I think that's a very real experience for 100% of the members of the church. like you just hope you have a friend nearby that would be like, girlfriend, you're join the club. You're good. You know, but I had an interesting experience with my husband where he grew up with a single mom, and he said, just because you don't achieve the ideal doesn't mean that you get rid of the ideal and you don't teach and strive for the ideal. He's like, yes, I grew up with a single mom, but I would never want that for my kids. I would never teach them to aim for that. I would never I would never teach them like, you should not get married and be a single parent. Just because we're maybe falling short of the ideal right? And then in some ways, like the Family Proclamation does illustrate those ideas where like there's a great division of labor between men and women, and you can lovingly take care of your children, and there's no fertility issues, and life happens and we fall short, and that's where the atonement of Jesus Christ comes in. But that's where I think maybe sometimes when we worry about, oh, so many people aren't maybe like living up to this definition, this standard, we forget, like, just because we aren't, like, it's not over yet. Just because we're falling short of the ideal doesn't mean we just drop it altogether.
Right. So I love what we're saying. Like, so kind of back to mission statement, like this is what the church is about. The church is about families. The church is about exaltation. I'm thinking about, again, mission statements. Like, it's clear that this church is all about families and that the proclamation is something that we follow. And if you are at church or in church doing church things, it's maybe not the most appropriate place to just come out and be very critical of the proclamation. I feel like that's, more like a one-on-one thing. Like, for example, because like that's like you're in the church's territory, right? Okay, so let me give a story. So Tikla is the director of a homeschool group, an amazing homeschool group. A few years ago, I started hiking with them and I became friends with all of them. And I just love all these women and I learned so much from them. My kids love their kids. It's great. And they invited me last year to be a part of their Commonwealth group that meets on Wednesdays, and they do all these classes that the mothers rotate teaching, and then they go to the park afterwards. And I still had my youngest at home. She was not in kindergarten yet. So I came with my one child. My other 5 were in public schools. And I had an amazing time. And when we would get together, a lot of the time, so I knew that this was a homeschool group and this was a value that they had, that they really valued education at home, that they valued all the things that entails, and that with that came often negative conversations or experiences with public schools. So conversations would, often be a lot about homeschool and helping each other, and then a lot of negativity about, and I share though, I share those views too. There are problems in public schools too.
Sometimes you have to share the stories to keep yourself going. Like, why am I doing this again?
Oh yeah. And so, but I share the story to say, like, I was in their space. I knew what they value. It was not a place for me to like diss homeschooling or like raise a flag about how public school is the greatest thing. Like, I was in their space and I took all the good that I could from them. And I appreciated every moment that I was there. And while I don't live that lifestyle, I saw the good in it and took the good from it. And I'm a better person from it, even though I live a different lifestyle. And so I think that those who are in the church who disagree with the proclamation, that's fine. You can live a different lifestyle, but that's what our church is. And so you can take the good from a church that supports the Family Proclamation and leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think I'd push back a little bit in that I think that church is a great place to have hard conversations. Kind of back to what Brittany was saying before. I think sharing where we're not understanding can be really powerful.
But but criticizing?
Well, maybe not critical. I mean, yeah, I guess. But I just had some fantastic conversations in church lessons when people were vulnerable enough to share, I don't understand this principle. And then trusting the Spirit to guide us, we would have a great conversation. So I would hate for anyone to interpret. I think I understand what you're saying, okay. But I would hate for anyone to interpret that as, we really don't want you to disagree with us ever at church. You can disagree other places, but don't disagree at church. Where I think it is a great place to
you can disagree respectfully.
Yeah, but
knowing where you are
maybe is
I mean, on the other side of what Charlotte's trying to say, I do think that there is a contingent of people in the church that are actually saying, oh, you're not good with this? Don't worry. It doesn't actually matter. Like there's a very active segment of the LDS group who have decided that the doctrines and beliefs of the Family Proclamation are not that relevant and don't need to be lived. And they
are teaching that.
Yeah. They actively teach that. Now, the principle, I'm sorry to cut you off, Tikla. The principle that I like, and I agree with what you're saying too, which is like some of the most meaningful conversations, like you're saying, like the depth are those conversations you can have with a spirit of friendship, where I have a pretty rock solid testimony of the family proclamation, but one of my closest friends doesn't. But we're able to like create space for, and I call it the principle of shelving. And I think any LDS woman, member of the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, who learned about polygamy had to go through this process, which is like, I don't understand this. I don't get it. When there's this initial urgency to like, oh, I've got to figure this out and understand this principle right now. I think it's okay to give people space to say like, you know, this, I'm going to put it on the top shelf. I'm going to revisit it later. I don't get it. Because there are principles of the family proclamation that I didn't fully appreciate until I was a mother and married. And I think that it's okay to give people space to not have a testimony or an understanding of things. That is a wildly different thing than what Charlotte, I think, is pointing to, which is, which I have seen, which is people who actively teach, and I've seen it done in my local area, that the family proclamation is a tangential doctrine. It's not a core doctrine. Now that was addressed last year. And yeah. But sorry, what were you saying, Tikla, about depth? I loved that point about like,
no, I think that's great. I think that's great. I think the shelf concept has kind of become a meme. Like people leave the church because their shelf broke.
Oh, I've never heard that one. What does that mean?
I think we might need a new analogy there.
Well, the jigsaw puzzle is a good one. You're putting a puzzle together, some pieces, you don't know where they go, how they fit, so you put them aside. You don't you don't discard the whole puzzle.
You
just wait till they
it fits. And so I think we do have to be diligent we can't be lazy learners, right? We have to be diligent in digging into these questions that we have and counseling together and finding ways to find those answers, because we don't want shelves breaking everywhere. But I think, where was I going to go with this? How do we teach the family proclamation? What does that look like? Give me an example of boldly teaching the principles of the family proclamation with our friends and in our wards and in our classes.
Well, I just did it at girls camp last week. There's hours of chatting. And I love asking questions. And so I was asking, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to study in college? And as soon as I asked that, I was like, oh, well, motherhood is the greatest thing. I really hope that's in your plan. What else is in your plan? Like putting that plug, not just brushing over it.
Rachel, I liked what you were saying about like with the shelf analogy, right? You're like, I don't understand this right now. I'm going to deal with that later. Maybe once I have more experience in my life, maybe once my brain is a little bit more mature, right? Because honestly, I can't remember the last time that I read the proclamation from start to finish. I know the gist of it, right? It's kind of like my patriarchal blessing. I've read it so many times. When was the last time I read it? I'm not sure, but I know what it says in there. But I think each time...
Recite it right now,
right?
Brittany.
Oh, goodness. But I think like each time when you read it, certain things will pop out at you. And you're like, oh, that's what that means. Or I didn't understand that. Or I still don't understand how that one's going to work. But I have faith it will. I think you can apply that to the proclamation where it's, okay, I read this a year ago. Let me reread it. Has my views changed? Do I understand something better? Let me pray over it. If I'm in Young Women's, if I'm a mom of kids, if I just have a friend group that's kind of struggling with it, let me pray over it, read it, and get some insight into maybe some phrases that I need to dive deeper into to really understand. So I think just constantly rereading and evolving and expanding your mind, and just through experiences of life. We have so many experiences every day that, you can understand something better and more deeper or deeply. I don't know. Whatever. Deepier. Yeah. Deeplier. Like what Tikla was saying. So I don't know if that made sense, but it made sense in my mind.
Oh yeah. That's awesome.
I think the number one way that we can, number one way that we can, in answer to your question, talk about the family proclamation in an adult setting is to stop self-censoring and to testify happily. And that's me talking in the mirror. It's like, I know the women in my ward that have an angry energy towards the family proclamation. That's the only way I know how to describe it. It's like it's a very like, so I know that I have a tendency to kind of maybe accommodate or avoid, I think we all do, to avoid awkwardness.
Avoid
But I
conflict.
think,
Yeah.
yeah. And especially if you're in a ward setting, but I think testifying happily, and to stop self-censoring. And you can do that without, teach the truth and let the spirit kind of carry it. We had a young women's lesson that was coming up that was on the family proclamation. It was on the law of chastity and marriage. And we knew that there were several girls that were really like, this was going to be a tricky lesson. And so the 5 leaders that were there, we all had rock solid testimonies of the family proclamation. And so we prayed that the spirit would just be like unrestrained. And I have never been in a meeting where the spirit was so powerful. And I didn't serve a mission, so I haven't had the experience of having the spirit teach an investigator versus me. But I think having faith that like you were saying, Tikla, like, I think the words of the family proclamation are so divine. It's divine wordage. Like if you read some of those sentences and you see how they've aged over time, there's a line in there that says, gender is an essential characteristic of premortal, mortal, and eternal identity. And I was like, how did they know?
No one was talking about identity.
No one. No. Like, phenomenal line. So I think that's a great question. I would say stop self-censoring, especially around adults, and happily testify to adults and to youth.
Well, and you said something that just stuck out when you said that you and the other leaders came to lesson with a rock solid testimony of the proclamation. I think if people are struggling to know if it is doctrine or old opinion, that they can pray about it as with any principle in the church, with anything. Take it to Heavenly Father. Take time. I know when I was wondering about Joseph Smith, what's the big deal about Joseph Smith? I took time. I read a lot. I prayed a lot. I talked to people, and then that confirmation came. And so it takes time. So I know speaking of time, we don't have a lot of time left. So I just want to share this little funny theory that I have. And I've run it by my teenage sons and some of their friends, and they've totally validated that my theory is so true. Okay, so Carden, pull up the picture of all those boy bands. Okay, so we probably all grew up in about the same era. You guys, you don't see them. But there's NSYNC, there's 98 Degrees, there's Backstreet Boys, and I've got pictures of them. I purposely wanted to find pictures of them with like muscles showing, their chest showing. Like these are the posters that we had on our walls growing up. Like the calendars, the posters, we cut out magazines, put their pictures everywhere, like really attractive men. And
can I just say, their songs. I miss those days where the hardest decision I had to make that day was telling my friends at school if I was NSYNC or Backstreet Boys, like which side of the aisle I was going to sit on, right? Like,
you're outing yourself.
It was so stressful though. It was like, oh my gosh, do I like NSYNC more or Backstreet Boys? I don't know.
So my theory is one of the main, if not the main reasons why young women are having like questions and struggles with their own identity and gender is because there are no cute boy bands anymore. Okay. Next picture. They have pictures of Taylor Swift, of this scantily clad woman all over their wall.
Whoa, Charlotte. Whoa.
Brittany's feeling called out. Whoa.
I love Taylor Swift.
Okay. BTS.
Are you a Swiftie? Brittany?
I am.
We can love Taylor Swift. I'm not, there's nothing wrong with Taylor Swift. My issue is, where are the hot boy bands that girls can have plastered to their walls? We've got Taylor Swift. We've got BTS. Look at this picture. They're pink hair, purple sweatshirts, long hair, very feminine, gestures. Okay.
Who knew how much good the boy bands were doing?
K-pop band of the Korean pop band. Is that a picture of the Korean pop band in there?
Yes. Did you pull
Okay, so one of my friends texted me a photo of one of those singers, and he's my doppelganger.
Really? What?
He's like,
Which one?
Now you won't be able to unsing it. I don't know. She's like, it's you. And I was like, that actually does look a lot.
Oh my gosh, I know what I'm doing tonight. I'm putting up Rachel's picture with different K-pop members.
Yeah.
Okay.
In another life.
So I think when girls are looking at posters in the room and they see all these pictures of Taylor Swift, and she is attractive. Any girl can say that too. They might question, oh my gosh, am I attracted to girls? So Hollywood,
there
Britney,
was really attractive
Carden,
girls in the 90s too. I don't know.
Yeah, but they were more boy band posters on a wall. So Brittany, Carden, you're down in LA. Find someone to gather up some 16-year-old boy, 17, whatever. I know there's a lot who want to be making a music career. Form a new boy band and get their pictures on our young women's walls so that they can remember boys are awesome. I'm attracted to boys. Yeah. That's my theory.
Okay. I'm going to bring it serious just one more time, maybe before we wrap this up. Is that okay? I think one thing we have to be careful of, and that is that sometimes now that we're becoming the leader generation, right? We're getting to be the teachers of these youth, this rising generation. And sometimes our cultural upbringing gets mixed in to the doctrine and we don't even realize it. And the younger generation can refresh what we understand and make it more, help us see the truth through it.
Are you saying for example, Backstreet Boys are affecting my view of doctrine?
Perhaps. It could be, Charlotte.
My upbringing?
You might need to listen a little bit because I think this is a hot take here, but I think there was some cultural exploration that needed to be done when it came to gender. Like, I think there is some good that has come out of this movement that we take for granted. And I would say it swung too far. Right. And so now we're trying to course correct. But in our efforts to course correct, let's not lose what was gained. These kids are super good at calling out bullying. Like they're really good at seeing people as individuals instead of as collective. They're really good at not assuming just because someone's wearing pink so there's certain things that we had in the 90s that they've gotten rid of that are good. And so let's learn from what they've brought to the table here. And then when we put their lens, their cultural lens and ours together and put it over the doctrine, then we'll see what's really true. So we can get rid of our own baggage about what we think it means to be a woman and instead have between the two generations see clearly. I think that's a possibility. So something to think about.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. Thanks for joining us for Ward Radio Women. We'd love to know what your thoughts are on this conversation. So leave a comment below. Have you had this experience with talking about the Family Proclamation? How would you go about talking about the Family Proclamation in a loving but honest way in your ward? For all this and more, go ahead and check out wardradio.com and we'll see you next time.